Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman, in tonight for Richard French. We are going to get you an image right there. That is Jay Sekulow, an attorney for the president, live on the Senate floor, where for the second straight day, senators have been asking questions to both the House managers and, as they're doing right now, the president's defense team. This could also be the second to last day of the impeachment trial altogether. It's appearing more and more likely that we will not see witnesses, which means the final votes and an all but assured acquittal of President Trump could happen as early as tomorrow. We'll have more on that in just a moment. We also want to make you a part of the program tonight. We're going to take some phone calls, and the lines are open right now. Here's the question. We've asked it all week. We're asking it again on the eve of a big vote on witnesses. Do we need to hear from witnesses before the final vote in this impeachment trial? You can give us a call right now, toll free, 888-766-2428. You want to spell it out, it's 888-RNN-CHAT, and we will put some of our best callers on the air. If you prefer email instead of the telephone, you can do that as well and reach us at rfl@rnntv.com. We have a lot to get to tonight. Before we do, let's get you a recap on how today's Q&A session has been going in the Senate so far.
Chief Justice John Roberts Thursday commencing the final day of the question and answer phase of President Trump's impeachment trial.
Mr. Chief Justice.
Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin's question setting the stage for the House managers to further argue the need for former National Security Advisor John Bolton to testify.
The administration continues to obstruct wholly our efforts to get the emails and correspondence that we have asked for. That obviously can be remedied by this body with the appropriate subpoenas, namely a subpoena to Ambassador Bolton.
Democrats say the allegations in Bolton's unpublished book, which reportedly state the president told Bolton he withheld military aid from Ukraine for political purposes, underscores their argument. The president's lawyers countering those claims in response to a question from Republican Senators Patrick Philbin stated that it is the president's right to block witnesses, including Bolton, without the presumption of guilt.
The concept of saying that when the president asserts constitutionally grounded prerogatives of his office, that is evidence of guilt, is a completely bogus assertion.
This comes as senators gear up for a critical vote on whether to allow new witnesses and documents, which could come down to 4 undecided Republican senators. If witnesses are allowed, some Republicans have insisted Joe and Hunter Biden be among those called. The president's legal team now arguing Trump launched investigations into the two men for both national and personal interests.
It's not campaign interference for credible information about wrongdoing to be brought to light, if it's credible information.
What president is not going to think he has a credible reason to investigate his opponent?
The head of the Federal Election Commission has previously said accepting foreign assistance in an election is a crime, and the FBI director says if a campaign receives an offer, they should contact his agency.
The big issue, of course, remains witnesses, so let's dig a little deeper into the fight for witnesses in the trial. And a spoiler alert, if you want witnesses, the news ain't pretty. Maine's Susan Collins not saying anything to reporters today when asked how she might vote. Collins asked or co-asked a number of provocative questions yesterday and did so to both sides. Another Republican we're watching is Tennessee's retiring Lamar Alexander. Now, he told reporters today his mind's still not made up on whether to call witnesses. He said he would pay close attention to the Q&A session before making up his mind, but that puts the vote count right now in a pretty perilous place. Right now, Mitt Romney is the only Republican publicly on record saying he will vote for witnesses. Susan Collins has said she will likely support witnesses, but it's Susan Collins, and we've heard that before. Lisa Murkowski says she's curious to hear from Biden, and Lamar Alexander is the question mark. But a lot of Republicans we thought might be on this list, including Colorado's Cory Gardner, Iowa's Joni Ernst, Arizona's Martha McSally, and others, have all publicly indicated that they will vote against witnesses. So if Democrats can't poach the 4 Republicans you're looking at on your screen right now, there just might not be any others to choose from. As for the Democrats, if it looks like a vote on witnesses is going to fail and the actual articles of impeachment come for a vote tomorrow, several Democrats might defect and vote with the GOP, but that's after the vote on witnesses. Now, tops on that list could be Arizona freshman Kyrsten Sinema. She said almost nothing to the press since the trial began. 2 other Democrats, though, with more pressing electoral concerns are sticking with their caucus. Alabama's Doug Jones is still backing witnesses, even though a yes vote on that might cost him his seat. And West Virginia's Joe Manchin says he still wants witnesses, even though he's rumored to be a candidate for governor in 2024 in a state that Donald Trump won by 42 points. So as Democrats in the Senate try to count votes, other top Democrats are already preparing the political ground for what happens after a presidential acquittal. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi told reporters you can't be acquitted if you don't have a trial, and you don't have a trial if you don't have witnesses and documentation. She also tried to frame the debate as being about more than just Donald Trump.
It isn't about just one person. It's about the precedent that it sets for the future. It's not about whether you like Donald Trump or not. It's not about it's not personal, it's not political, it's not partisan. It's about patriotism. It's about undermining the system of checks and balances, and that is what they are doing on the Senate floor. The fate of our nation is riding on how this is resolved.
One more headline to report on, and this comes from a federal court case this morning on a case related to the census. But the arguments in that hearing drifted from the census to impeachment. I'll let Adam Schiff tell the rest of the story.
You can't make this stuff up. Today, while we've been debating whether a president can be impeached for essentially bogus claims of privilege for attempting to use the courts to cover up misconduct, the Justice Department, in resisting House subpoenas, is in court today and was asked, well, if the Congress can't come to the court to enforce its subpoenas, because as we know, they're in here arguing Congress must go to court to enforce its subpoenas, but they're in the court saying, Congress, thou shalt not do that. So the judge says, if the Congress can't enforce its subpoenas in court, then what remedy is there? And the Justice Department lawyer's response is impeachment. Impeachment. You can't make this up. I mean, what more evidence do we need of the bad faith of this effort to cover up? I said the other day they're in this court making this argument, they're down the street making the other argument. I didn't think they'd make it on the same day. But that's exactly what's going on.
And yes, you did hear members of the Senate laughing twice during that explanation as Schiff was addressing the Senate. Now that brings us to the schedule for the trial, as we've updated every night since the trial began. So here's what we know about tomorrow and beyond. The answer is we just don't know. We know there will be motions tomorrow on witnesses, evidence, and almost certainly a motion to dismiss, and one to move on to the articles of impeachment for votes on them themselves. That means the trial could be over and the president could be acquitted by tomorrow night or early Saturday morning, or witnesses get approved and then we still don't know what happens after that. It is very confusing and a lot of pieces are still not in place yet. Let's get into some analysis, and for that we have a terrific guest with us tonight. Joining us, former Congressman Chris Says, the Republican from Connecticut, served during the Clinton impeachment trial. And first of all, just your reaction to what you've seen from the trial so far.
Well, the first day, I was impressed with both sides, frankly. I thought, gosh, if you listen to them, yeah, he should be impeached. And you listen to the president's men, I thought, you know what, he shouldn't be impeached. I mean, and then I turned on the TV programs and watched MSNBC and said, I guess he should be impeached. And then I watched Fox, and I guess he shouldn't be impeached. So, I mean, I was kind of impressed with the quality of their thinking and presentation. They had done their homework. That was my first day. After that, it just got to be a little redundant, and then you started to hear some really absurd arguments, frankly, more on the president's side than on the House side, but still, that was my reaction.
And we had some probing questions yesterday, but really most of the questions today have devolved into Democrats giving the House impeachment managers some leverage to make a point that they want to have made, right, and Republicans doing the same with the president's defense team. So not a lot of new probative information, but stay with us, Chris, because I want to ask you about a big issue that has come up from testimony yesterday that came from Alan Dershowitz, the Harvard law professor emeritus, who gave an argument that basically said the president can do just about anything he wants if he thinks it's in the national interest to do so. I want to play the clip from Dershowitz, and then we'll play the clip from Adam Schiff, but here's Professor Dershowitz.
If a president does something which he believes will help him get elected in the public interest, that cannot be the kind of quid pro quo that results in impeachment. Unless you build a hotel with my name on it, and unless you give me $1 million kickback, I will withhold the funds. That's an easy case. That's purely corrupt and in the purely private interest. But a complex middle case is, I want to be elected. I think I'm a great president. I think I'm the greatest president there ever was, and if I'm not elected, the national interest will suffer greatly. That cannot be an impeachable offense. Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice.
Now, when you hear Professor Dershowitz say that, there's a certain air of authority that he has with him, and it sounds relatively plausible. Now, see if you feel the same way after you hear Adam Schiff's response to Dershowitz.
Chief Justice, Senator, there is no limiting principle to the argument that we heard last night from the president's team. That is, if there's a quid pro quo that the president believes will help him get reelected, and he believes his reelection is in the national interest, then it doesn't matter how corrupt that quid pro quo is. It's astonishing that on the floor of this body someone would make that argument. Now, it didn't begin that way in the beginning of the president's defense, but what we have seen over the last couple days is a descent into constitutional madness, because that way madness lies. If we are to accept the premise that a president essentially can do whatever he wants, engage in whatever quid pro quo he wants, I will give you this if you will give me that to help me get elected. I will give you military dollars if you will give me help in my reelection. If you will give me illicit foreign interference in our election. Now, the only reason you make that argument is because you know your client is guilty and dead to rights. That is an argument made of desperation.
And we're joined once again by former Connecticut Congressman Chris Says. And I don't want to get into whether that argument leads to him being guilty or not guilty, but the impact of that.
It was a very harmful argument because, frankly, if I were in the Senate, I would be, on balance, voting against impeachment. But I sure as heck wouldn't want people to think I did it based on his argument. I just don't think either article rises to the level of impeachment, which is something different.
That's fine, but just drilling down on the Dershowitz argument.
Well, I think it's just a serious, dumb argument from my standpoint, because there appears to be no limits. And then I think, well, Nixon could have done certain things.
It would have legitimized Watergate. I mean,
well,
by that rationale, it would have legitimized.
Well, I don't know if he said you could break the law.
Okay. But it sounds like that defense says a president could take assistance in the election from Vladimir Putin.
I don't know where the limits are based on his argument.
Could cancel the election.
I just don't know where the limits are. And the last person who needs to hear this argument is President Trump. One of the reasons why I would be tempted to vote for impeachment is he's going to declare victory. And frankly, it's one of the reasons I didn't even want impeachment to come up, because I thought afterwards, how in the world are they going to be able to make sure he doesn't go off the deep edge even further, because they can't impeach him again.
I wouldn't think so. That seems practically impossible.
Yeah, and so if he declares victory based on some of the arguments we've heard, it would be very sad.
We're just monitoring what's going on in the big box that's on your screen right now. We're waiting for the next question to go up to Chief Justice John Roberts, who will then read that question. As we did last night on this program, we're going to dip in from time to time, see what the question is, and see if it's the kind of question that we think we already know the answer to. If we do, we'll come back and talk more. But here's John Roberts.
The question from Senator Baldwin is for both parties, and counsel for the president will answer first. Can you assure us that the Jennifer Williams document submitted to the House was not classified secret for any reasons prohibited by Executive Order 13526, such as preventing embarrassment to a person? If yes, please describe or identify the serious damage to national security that would be caused by declassifying this document pursuant to the same executive order.
Mr. Chief Justice and Senator, in response to your question, the Trump administration's policy is always to abide by the requirements for classification of material, and the classification, my understanding is that that document is derivatively classified because it refers to another document, a transcript that was originally classified. I can't represent to you the specific reasons that the classification officer classified that document, but I can tell you that it was originally classified according to proper procedures. It is a properly classified document because that is the policy of the administration, to follow the classification procedures. The memorandum that she submitted is derivatively classified because of that transcript. Now, that transcript relates to conversation with a foreign head of state. Almost all conversations with foreign heads of state are classified. And they're classified because the confidentiality related.
And this seems like a pretty obvious answer that the Trump defense team is going to say, well, we classified things properly. But as we're continuing to be joined by former Connecticut Congressman Chris Says, classification has come up a couple of times now, both with Jennifer Williams and also with John Bolton's book, where they're classifying the manuscript and saying he can't release it right now. But improper documents being classified improperly is a real concern.
I had a hearing when I chaired the National Security Subcommittee of Government Oversight on just the issue of classification. And the groups who oppose classification felt 90% of what we classify shouldn't be classified. And the other groups within the government said about 50%. We classify too many things, the public doesn't get to hear it, and this is a great opportunity for a president of either party to classify things that might embarrass them.
And things that might injure the administration as well. So
injure, but even embarrass.
Right. Is there any recompense for that? Is there any way around that?
It's very difficult. Yeah.
As we continue, Adam Schiff is now responding to that same question. Let's dip in for just a second and listen to what Congressman is saying.
Was being held up and was tied to these investigations. And the Vice President didn't say, what are you talking about? That could never be. The President would never allow such a thing. There was nothing but a silent nod of acknowledgement with what he was being told. But nonetheless, the Vice President says that he knew nothing. And the Vice President points to the open testimony of Jennifer Williams to support that contention. But the classified submission goes to that phone call between the Vice President and President Zelensky. You should read that and ask yourself whether that submission is being classified because it would either embarrass or undermine what the President and the Vice President are saying, or there's some legitimate reason. Now, the Vice President at one point said that he wanted to release the record of his call. He certainly talked all about this issue, as has the President. If it was so classified, then why are they all talking about it? But we are to be assured that this classification decision was made absolutely above board. I'm sure that John Bolton's manuscript will be treated with the same rigid, objective scrutiny. You read that. Don't take my word for it. You read that and you ask yourselves, is there anything that other than avoiding evidence that the administration doesn't want you to see, that the public shouldn't see Jennifer Williams' supplemental testimony? I don't think you can conclude that it is, except that it would be inconsistent with what you're being told and what the American people are being told. Well, they deserve the whole truth, and that's part of the truth. So let the public see it.
Thank you, Mr. Manager.
Mr. Chief Justice.
The Senator from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice.
All right, so that was a conversation about Jennifer Williams, who is the aide to Mike Pence. She testified before the House Impeachment Committee and then amended her testimony with a one-page document that was classified. It was released to senators who had to go into a secure room to read it. That was the genesis of that question. And as we talked about before, John Bolton's manuscript has also been classified. We're awaiting a recess for dinner from the Senate, but before they do that, I want to go to the phones and take some calls because we've already got some people queued up, and Chris Shays just doesn't take phone calls that often. So we'll start with Terry, who is calling us from West Hempstead on Long Island in New York. Terry, your thoughts about the trial and whether there's a need for witnesses? Terry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Terry, your thoughts on the trial and the need for witnesses?
Okay. I mean, I think it's absolutely mandatory that we have witnesses. if the Oval Office didn't squash the subpoenas and allowed all the witnesses to testify in the impeachment hearing, maybe their position would have some weight. However, everyone with firsthand knowledge hasn't been heard from, and so any trial without hearing from Bolton, Mulvaney, and others is a sham, and the Republicans should be ashamed of themselves, and I'm speaking as an embarrassed registered Republican.
Has it been difficult, Terry, for you to reach that conclusion, or difficult dealing with other Republicans as you've shared your thoughts about impeachment?
Well, it's not difficult for me to reach that conclusion because President Trump has been an embarrassment to me in this country, even during the campaign. But trying to talk to other Republicans, and the community I live in has a lot of them, is been like, trying to talk to a brick wall.
Well, stay strong, Terry, and for better or for worse, there's a lot of possibility that this trial will be over tomorrow, so maybe the page turns a little bit, although I'm sure some of the sentiments you were sharing aren't going anywhere anytime soon. Next up, let's go to Brenda, who is calling us from Virginia. Brenda, your take on the trial so far, and do you want to see witnesses?
I don't want to see witnesses. I think it's very suspect how Bolton came out of the closet just the day before, this whole thing about having witnesses. As far as classification, only one agency can classify, and we can't tell you why something is classified. That's actually classified. So I don't understand the whole classification thing that they're talking about, but no, I want to move this on. I want to stop wasting America's money, hard-working taxpayers' money, for something that if you don't want him in office, you vote him out. It's so simple. And you know what? This is a complete sham, because all they're trying to do is make sure that they don't have to run against him. That's so clear. And
quick question, Brenda, and I appreciate the call. I just want to ask a follow-up, because you said, and I think there's some validity to your concern. John Bolton's information comes out just at the last minute, and you said it's suspect. Don't you want to ask him questions so you can find out if it's legitimate, find out if what he's saying is true?
It could take 9 months to get through that. And you know what? Why don't we just follow the right process? I mean, they've lied so many times. They lied about what was on the transcript. They lied about, him. No,
they didn't, Brenda. I'm sorry. They didn't lie about what was on the transcript. Adam Schiff, at a hearing, paraphrased what the readout of the call was, and before he did it, he said he was paraphrasing. President Trump has turned that into a nonstop attack on Adam Schiff ever since. So I appreciate the call, but I'm just going to be fact-checking everybody as we go through.
This isn't C-SPAN, huh?
No, it's not. Calling on the Republican line.
Let me just tell you what this illustrates. Both believe sincerely, as patriotic Americans, two different positions. And it's a great example to me of how it was wrong, frankly, for the Democrats to suggest that if you didn't vote for impeachment, frankly, they gave the impression you weren't being a patriotic American and you didn't care about it. People feel very strongly both ways within even a family. And my last comment to you is, controversy is the enemy of the incumbent. If you think that it's easy for some of these members to vote, it's just easy to vote this way and politically, no, they're going to make enemies no matter what they do.
I got another question for you, because Donald Trump is probably the least predictable president we've ever had, but one thing we can predict is that he takes every little minor win and turns it into a major victory. And
this is my biggest fear.
Well, I was going to, what do you think happens if Donald Trump is acquitted? Certainly he's going to think, well, I've got carte blanche to do just about whatever I want. Who's going to check me? Who's going to hold? I mean, I do have some concerns about what this president does after he's acquitted.
But see, your concern is my concern, and it's why I didn't even want this to even happen. Because we know it's not a great idea when one party votes for impeachment, one party doesn't. Right then, you're really divided. You have a pretty good idea if it goes to the Senate based on Democrats saying impeach and the Republicans saying no, that he's not going to be removed from office when he's in the Senate, even if they picked up more votes. And then we get to your point. And your point is he will feel like he has been empowered to do whatever the hell he wants. And that scares me.
Although I think there's room for debate as to whether, as you said, you had concerns as the Democrats bringing this impeachment. You could make a similar concern that Republicans have not honored the spirit of the impeachment fully in terms of...
You can, but we know that Democrats said in the last hearing...
I'm going to interrupt because we got another question going into John Roberts. Let's hear from the Chief Justice.
Question from Senator Schumer for the House Managers. Many of our colleagues are worried that if we were able to bring witnesses and documents in the trial, it would take too long. Mr. Schiff mentioned we could do depositions in 1 week. Please elaborate. What can you say that will reassure us that having witnesses and documents can be done in a short time, minimally impeding the business of the Senate?
I thank the Senator for the question. First of all, with respect to the documents that we subpoenaed and sought to get in the House, those documents have been collected. So that work has been done. We've been informed, for example, the State Department documents have been collected. Those could readily be provided to the Senate for its consideration. With respect to witnesses, if we agree to a 1-week period to do depositions while you continue to conduct the business of the Senate, it doesn't mean that we would have unlimited witnesses during that week. No, we would have to decide on witnesses who are relevant and probative of the issues. Neither side would have an unlimited capacity to call endless witnesses. We would have a limited period of time, just as we had a limited period of time for our opening presentations and for this question and answer period. If there was any dispute over whether a witness is truly material and probative, that decision could be made by the Chief Justice in very short order. If there was a dispute as to whether a passage in a document is covered by an applicable privilege, and if for the first time the White House should actually invoke a privilege, the Chief Justice could decide, is that properly laid, or is that merely an attempt to conceal crime or fraud? So this can be done very quickly. This can be done, I think, effectively. We have never sought to depose every witness under the face of the sun. We have specified 4 in particular that we think are particularly appropriate and relevant here. But we should be able to reach an agreement on concluding that process within a week. So that's how we would contemplate it being done. We make that proposal to our opposing counsel. It would be respectful of your time. It would, I think, be a reasonable accommodation. My counsel says that the Constitution mandates a reasonable accommodation. Well, let's have a reasonable accommodation here. And a reasonable accommodation would be, we'll take 1 week, you'll continue with the business in the Senate, we'll do the depositions, and then we'll come back and we'll present to you what the witnesses had to say in those depositions. And that's how we contemplate the process would work.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. The Majority Leader is recognized.
All right, that was an important question and answer because we've heard that as a concern. And it, by the way, it looks like Senator McConnell is announcing the dinner break. So we're about to hit a recess there. But I wanted to ask Chris Says because for a lot of people who have never spent time in a legislative body, the idea that this whole thing could just take longer as an argument not to do something seems ridiculous. But how legitimate is that as a concern, do you think, for the 100 members of the Senate or when you were in the House?
Well, in this case, they could do it within the week. And, you know, sometimes they come in on Tuesday and they leave Thursday. So they could do it.
Would that really change minds? Do you think that some members of the Senate might be like, I really don't want to do this because of the time?
Well, some members believe that even if Bolton heard the president say exactly what was reported, it still doesn't mean they would vote to impeach him. So they say, what's the point? But to me, the point would be that it would give more credence ultimately to the final decision. And I think most Americans would expect it.
Okay. The Senate has not recessed yet for dinner, so the questions are continuing, and we're continuing to monitor that. Any decision about witnesses and a decision about the final outcome of this trial is going to be less legally oriented, less focused on the law, and more focused on politics. Chris, you would agree with me on that? That for most of these senators, the the determining factor is going to be how it impacts their electoral future?
That is going to be a major factor, but it won't be the only one. And the reason it won't be the only one is you have to live with this vote the rest of your life. And, you know, votes on war, I voted, for instance, to go into Iraq. I wish I hadn't. Not because I didn't think he had weapons, but just let me quickly say, because I don't like how we conducted it once we were there. Had I known we were so unprepared, I would. So that's a vote I have to live with. I liked my vote against impeachment of President Clinton, and I felt it was the right vote. So I have votes that I look back and say, good for me, and some that I regret. Bottom line, this is too big a vote just to have it be about whether you can get reelected.
You bucked your party in the House vote on impeaching President Clinton. Right now, a lot of Democrats are looking to Republicans in the Senate, hoping that they'll do the same thing. How much pressure was put on you by the party, by party leadership? Were they threatening your elective future?
No. Well, first off, I had a primary in 3 of my towns for delegates who were going to vote against me. In, say, New Canaan, 39 of the 40 town committee people, the people who run the party within the town of New Canaan, 39 wanted him impeached, only 1 didn't. So it wasn't a popular vote. But the bottom line is, you also have your primary and your own party, but then you have all the other voters who aren't Republicans who have an opinion too, and their opinion matters. So, bottom line, it's just controversy tends to be the enemy of the incumbent.
The reason I'm asking about the politics is because we had a poll yesterday from Quinnipiac in the great state of Connecticut relating to impeachment, specifically as to whether witnesses should testify. And that poll indicated 75% of all Americans say yes, that witnesses should be called in this. The number on Republicans is wrong, by the way. It's not 75% of Republicans, it's 49% of Republicans, but that's still almost half of every Republican saying that they want to have witnesses. Now, there are other poll numbers that we could show, but if we went through the poll numbers for the moderate or endangered Republicans in the Senate, Susan Collins in Maine, Cory Gardner in Colorado, Joni Ernst in Iowa, the numbers aren't great there either, where there's big numbers who want to hear from witnesses.
So let me just give you a taste. When I had a community meeting in which 6,000 people tried to get into a room of 1,200, but ultimately it started at 7, lasted till 2:30. The reason why so many people were there, Limbaugh was telling people to come. And so you have huge activity on the part of conservative Republican media folks to drum up opposition to anyone who would vote to have information and more testimony.
We just saw, as we flashed Susan Collins' numbers, 71% of people in Maine said that they want to see witnesses. How do you go and sell it? Is there an argument you can think of?
I don't know how she could deny having witnesses. And frankly, I think you could make an argument to vote against anyone who was against witnesses, just on that basis alone.
We are continuing to monitor the activity that is happening on the Senate floor as we the current question is a follow-up question to the one that we played you before. And so we are monitoring to see what the next question is. And if it's one of interest, we will dip back into that.
Could I just jump in for a second on the caller?
We'll recognize the congressman from Connecticut.
Thank you, sir. So I would be voting against impeachment, but I would be voting to have more testimony. So the irony is the second caller, Brenda, who was against having more witnesses, ultimately she and I agree on the outcome. We just don't agree on the process.
Okay, we are anticipating another question heading over to the Chief Justice as we scan the chamber. So, by the way, John Roberts' only role has been to read these questions and to admonish senators on the first day for their comportment. Let's hear from the Chief Justice.
The House will go first in answering the question from Senator Coons and Klobuchar. Mr. Sekulow said earlier that the President's counsel would expect to call their own witnesses in this trial if Mr. Bolton or others are called by the House managers. Can you tell the Senate if any of those witnesses would have firsthand knowledge of the charges against the President and his actions?
Mr. Justice, Senator, there certainly are witnesses that the president could call with firsthand information. I don't know that they're the witnesses that they have described so far. Their position is apparently if you're the chairman of a committee doing an investigation, that makes you a relevant witness. It doesn't, or you've all become witnesses in your own investigations. They want to call Joe Biden as a witness. Joe Biden can't tell us why military aid was withheld from Ukraine while it was fighting a war. Joe Biden can't tell us why President Zelensky couldn't get in the door of the White House while the Russian foreign minister could. He's not in a position to answer those questions. He can't tell us whether this rises to an impeachable abuse of power, although he probably has opinions on the subject. But are there witnesses they could call? Absolutely. They have said, Mick Mulvaney issued a statement saying, the president never said what I said he had said earlier. Well, if that's the case, then why don't they call Mick Mulvaney? He should be on their witness list. If Secretary Pompeo has evidence that there was a policy basis to withhold the aid and it was discussed, well, then why don't they call him? That's a relevant fact witness. They don't want to allow the Chief Justice to decide issues of materiality because they know what they're trying to do involves witnesses that don't shed light on the charges against the president. They do satisfy the appetite of their client, but they don't have probative value to the issues here. So, yes, there are witnesses. Now, the reason they're not on the president's witness list is because if they were truthful under oath, they would incriminate the president. Otherwise, they would be begging to have Mick Mulvaney come testify. Otherwise, they'd be begging to have the head of OMB, who helped administer the freeze on behalf of the president. Let's bring him in. He'll tell you it was completely innocent. It was all about burden sharing. So why don't they want the head of OMB in? Why don't they want their own people in? Because their own people will incriminate the president. But there's no shortage of relevant, probative witnesses. They just don't want you to hear what they have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Manager.
Besides the fact that Mr. Schumer said, and it's on page 675 of the transcript, that we could call any witnesses we want, Mr. Schiff just said we can call their witnesses. And that's what he said, you can call their witnesses, because under their theory, if we wanted to talk to the whistleblower, even in a secure setting, to find out if he in fact may have worked for the vice president, or may have worked on Ukraine, or may have been in communication with the staff, that's irrelevant. We can't talk to Joe Biden or Hunter Biden because that's irrelevant, except the conversation that is the subject matter of this inquiry, the phone call, transcript that you selectively utilize, has a reference to Hunter Biden. The conversation with Burisma, they raised it for about a half a day, saying there was nothing there. Well, let me find out through cross-examination. But I just think the irony of this before we go to dinner, that we could call anyone we want except the witnesses we want, but we can call their witnesses that they want. Remember we said the fruit of the poisonous tree? It's still the fruit of the poisonous tree. It doesn't get better with age, as I said. But this idea that this is going to be a fair process, call the witnesses they want. Don't call the witnesses you want because they're irrelevant. Maybe irrelevant to them. They are not irrelevant to the president. And they're not irrelevant to our case. Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice.
Counsel, Mr. Majority Leader, I understand we have 45 minutes.
Mr. Chief Justice.
And this is the formal process by which the dinner break begins. So the Senate is about to go into recess. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we want to go through as many phone calls as we possibly can so you can weigh in before the senators weigh in. You see the numbers on your screen. Anything you want to talk about related to impeachment or witnesses, you take over the program right after this.